Wizards of the Coast have been working on 2 new classes for some time now, and several iterations of these classes have seen the light of day through the Unearthed Arcana. Right now, the latest versions of these classes can be found on the DM's Guild, and they are in the later stages of playtesting. Adding a completely new class can have some rather widespread effects on the game, so I think it's important to get them just right. I've been following the progress of both classes since they were first announced, and I have more than a few things to say about their current state. In today's video we're looking at the Artificer, part wizard, part engineer. We will be saving the mystic for a later date, as psionics in D&D is a topic I'm very passionate about as a lover of Dark Sun, and I want to do it justice. So, what is an Artificer anyway? Artificers got their start as a wizard specialization in previous editions and grew into their own class with the Eberron campaign setting. Artificers are craftsmen that use magic and engineering to create objects of incredible power. They use arcane magic much like wizards, but prefer to infuse objects with power rather than casting spells normally. In previous editions, Artificers had access to homunculi that functioned much like more powerful familiars. They could craft potions, wands, and other one-time use items, and they could repair constructs. One of the problems with the Artificer is that they do not fit into every campaign setting. They are very much a high fantasy element, and although they fit great into Eberron, and one could argue for their existence in Lantan in Forgotten Realms, or use them to represent the clockwork mages of Al-Qadim, I think they would fit extremely poorly into campaign settings such as Dark Sun. As such, I believe it is important that the Artificer remains as an optional class, something a DM can add to a campaign if it fits, and that is never included as a base class. Now, let's take a look at how the Artificer works currently in 5th edition. I've included a link to the class on the DM's Guild in the description below, so you can read along with me as I analyze the class. I don't have a lot to say about the lore presented. It is rather vague and generic, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I imagine that this is mostly filler that will be changed at a later date, and if this is meant to be dropped into any campaign setting, we don't want to get too specific. If this is ever released tied to Forgotten Realms, for instance, I expect a much more detailed lore. One of the things that the introduction tries heavily to paint up is the fantasy and feeling of playing an Artificer, a hype that the class partially fails to live up to later on, but we'll get to that. So let's just jump straight into the meat of the mechanics. For the most part, all the basics presented seem alright. Hit dice, proficiencies, saving throws is just about what you would expect to see with an Artificer. I'm a little surprised to see that the Artificer cannot choose perception as a skill, as one of their main roles in a party is to deal with traps and such. But they do get investigation, so I suppose they are more the guy at the back of the party you bring in to disarm a trap after someone else spots it, or to thoroughly search a room after the fact. There are a few minor things with their equipment that I find odd. First off, they get to choose between a hand axe and a light hammer, both of which are simple weapons. Or 2 simple weapons of their choice. Seems a little redundant. Artificers also receive a crossbow, which I would say is probably one of the most iconic weapons for the class, but which is potentially useless depending on which specialization you choose. Artificers are one of those classes that choose a specialization out of the gate at level 1, and depending on which specialization you choose, your Artificer will work vastly different. Before we jump into these specializations, however, let's talk about the general abilities shared by all Artificers. At level 1, you gain the ability to cast Detect Magic and Identify as ritual spells, and without using material components for your Identify. Very useful tricks and fits the class well. It is important to note here that Artificers are not ritual casters. You can only cast these 2 specific spells as rituals. I would also like to point out that Artificers do not get the ability to cast spells until a higher level, so until level 3 these spells can only be cast as rituals. At 2nd level, Artificers gain expertise in all tool proficiencies provided by the class, meaning they double their proficiency bonus when rolling for using those tools. When I first read this, my gut reaction was that this was incredibly powerful and maybe should be restricted to a certain number, but as I read on I realized that the tools you gain at character creation are the only ones you get through the class, except for a single one tied to one of the specializations. I find this to be a bit of a shame, although I would like to restrict expertise to 2 tools at level 2, I would also like to open it up so the class awards additional tool proficiencies as an Artificer levels up. Tool proficiencies are one of the more underrated and underused things in 5th edition rule set, and I think that one of the fantasies fulfilled by playing an Artificer is the idea of being a master craftsman. and so I find it a bit of a shame that they don't grow over a career and learn more crafts. At 2nd level, you also get access to your first magical item. You receive another at 5th level, and then one more every 5 levels after that. It's a pretty cool idea, and it gives you access to some very neat items that all feel very much like the tools of an Artificer. It allows you to customize your abilities very well, but there is one thing I dislike about how this ability works. Magical items can be sold, destroyed, or given away, meaning that you can essentially permanently lose abilities that you have gained by leveling up. No other class has a weakness like that. Also, in a low fantasy setting, this ability is incredibly powerful, since magical items will be rare. But if you're running a high fantasy game where magical items are common, then this ability will be far less useful. It feels thematic though, if a little clunky. Artificers gain access to spellcasting at level 3. Artificers have their own unique spell list and can eventually learn how to cast up to 4th level spells. I hope that whenever the Artificer is officially released that they will add some spells from Sanafars to the spell list, but at the moment it only includes spells from the player's handbook. The spells provided to an Artificer mostly focus on either utility or on enhancing individuals or items. There are no attack spells. Overall, it feels thematic with the class. Artificers use intelligence as their spellcasting ability, which I like. It fits very well with the idea of an Artificer, how they learn magic, and with their origins as a specialization of the wizard, and there's definitely an abundance of classes that use charisma right now. At level 4, the Artificer gains access to one of their most iconic abilities, namely the ability to infuse items with magic. This essentially allows them to share their buffs with their party and to prep spells beforehand. One neat thing that this allows it to do is to cast self-targeting spells on others by first imbuing them into an item. The one thing I think they need to clarify with how this works is with concentration. I'm fairly certain that the one that activates the spell counts as its caster and therefore its activator and uses his concentration to keep the spell going, and not the Artificer. Still, this isn't expressly noted, and to avoid any confusion it might be a good idea to mention it. Especially considering how thoroughly they explain the rest of the process of imbuing and activating items in the text. At 5th and 15th level, Artificers gain the ability to attune to one additional item. This is potentially very powerful and allows them to stack up effects to rather insane levels. I haven't done enough playtesting of the Artificer myself to see if this would be a problem, but even though there is a potential for abuse with this ability, I think it's a pretty neat one. Artificers are meant to rely highly on their tools and to have mastered the art of magical item use, and so it's thematic and appropriate to allow them to use more magical items than other classes. Moving on, we get to level 6, where the Artificer manages to construct a mechanical servant. This is clearly meant to be a replacement for the homunculi that the Artificers used to have the ability to craft, and I'm a little torn about how I feel about it. On one hand, it is rather cool to construct this large mechanical monstrosity that can carry you into battle and be your bodyguard and beast of burden all in one, but on the other hand, not everyone will want to have a large companion with them. I know some of my players hate what they call pack classes, and although they might be interested in the Artificer in general, they will reject the entire class based on the Servant. Others I know would have preferred to have a smaller creature, like a wizard's familiar or the homunculi of old, finding a large beast to be unwieldy and conspicuous for dungeon crawls or more sensitive missions. In the end, I think I have to fall on the side of liking the addition of this ability, but I do wish that there were some more options to choose between, and perhaps some additional abilities to tweak and customize your companion. It might even have been a good idea to remove this entirely from the main class and add it to a specific specialization that deals with constructs where you forge a companion and improve it over time. So now we come to the last ability granted to all Artificers, Soul of Artifice. First off, it lets you attune to yet another magical item, and then it gives you a plus to all your saving throws equal to the number of magical items you're attuned to. This seems pretty insane to me. Granted, this is a level 20 ability, so it's supposed to be extremely powerful. Most players will never reach level 20, but still, that is a plus 6 to all saving throws. And that is before you add all your other modifiers. This means you can fairly easily get an intelligence saving throw of plus 17. I don't even want to think about the maximum you can reach, considering those 6 attunement slots you have. I'm having a hard time thinking whether or not this is too powerful, so let's think about it for a moment and compare it to some of the other level 20 abilities. So Barbarians gain plus 4 to 2 of their main stats and unlimited rages. Feels like it could be in the same ballpark, but what about Bards? They gain an extra inspiration at the start of each combat. yeah, doesn't feel like it compares. Clerics, though, ought to succeed under Divine Intervention, so maybe it isn't too powerful. Maybe the problem here is that some of the other level 20 abilities just aren't very impressive. I would say it feels in line with the Artificer class at least. Moving on to the specializations, the Unearthed Arcana provides us with two options. So first up is the Alchemist. Now I have one complaint straight out of the gate with the Alchemist. They do not receive proficiency in alchemy, meaning you can create an alchemist who does not know alchemy. You can choose alchemy as one of the 2 proficiencies provided by the class, but the other specialization receives smithing 2 proficiency because it is essential to what they do. It feels like the alchemist should be the same. There's no way you can be a successful alchemist if you completely lack the knowledge of how basic alchemy works. The Artificer is a knowledge-based class after all. They do not receive their powers from being in tune with nature or from raw innate talent or power. Artificing is a learned skill, so please, give Alchemist proficiency in their tools. So what does the Alchemist offer you as an Artificer? Well, at level 1 you receive a magical bag that you can pull different magical potions and solutions out of, and drink or toss at people. They receive 3 different types that you can pull out of your bag at level 1. These include a healing tonic and some you can use for damage or to distract. Overall a nice selection of tricks, and at higher levels you receive more variants and your concoctions grow in strength. Now the magical bag solves a lot of practical issues with this specialization, allowing the Artificer to be able to pull out just what they need at the right time, but here's where I think the specialization fails. The specialization fails to capture the fantasy of playing an alchemist. There's no brewing of potions, no careful preparation, no laboratory, no sudden explosions. If I want to play an alchemist, then I would want to actually do some alchemy. Mechanically, I think the specialization is fine, but I think it just feels wrong. I'm not sure how to make it feel more like alchemy. One suggestion that comes to mind would be that an alchemist must prepare his concoctions beforehand during a long rest. It's not a perfect solution by any means, and it's definitely a huge nerf on the viability of a specialization, but at least you would get some of the feeling of having to brew your potions and solutions. In that case, they wouldn't be endless, and so the recipes would need to be increased in strength. I'm not sure. If anyone has any good suggestions on how to make the alchemist feel better, let me know in the comments below. The other specialization is the Gunsmith. Now, throughout the text they keep referring to the 2 largest specializations of artificing as alchemy and engineering, so I was a little surprised when the other specialization was all about boomsticks. Out of the gate, I would like to make it clear that I do not believe a gun should be a thing in every D&D setting. They've become far too common these days, for my taste, and I would like to also say that I used to love the ideas of guns in D&D. 2 of my favorite settings are Spelljammer and Ravenloft, settings that have firearms. And one of my favorite creatures growing up was the Gith, who were hippomen obsessed with guns and explosives. So now you know what biases I'm looking at this specialization with. Let's break down what the specialization actually offers. First off, at level 1 you receive Smith's Tools proficiency and Demanding Cantrip. Makes sense. You need the skills and knowledge to construct a magical firearm and to maintain it. You also receive your magical gun, known as a Thunder Cannon. Now, first off, this is not a normal gun, this is a magical device, which is good in my opinion. It allows you to produce some interesting magical effects later. Now this Thunder Cannon is a ranged weapon that does 2d6 damage, has a short range of 150 feet and a max range of 500 feet. It is straight up better than any crossbow, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is a bit of a shame as the crossbow is an iconic weapon for the class. If it wasn't for a slight advantage on range and the ability to make multiple attacks, the Thunder Cannon would be substantially better than longbows as well, as the Thunder Cannon requires a bonus action to reload. This gun is better than any cantrip in the game. It is pretty much the best single-shot ranged weapon in the game. Here's my problem though. It doesn't feel like a medieval firearm. The Thunder Cannon is the D&D equivalent of a sniper rifle, able to pick off targets at extreme ranges with massive damage. D&D is, in my opinion, a medieval fantasy game, and this feels more like a long gone from a western. I would like it to feel more like an early arquebus, blunderbuss or hand cannon of a Renaissance. Depending on the campaign you're playing in, this may very well be the first gun ever forged, so it should feel like the first guns that humans made, not like something several hundred years more advanced. It should be deadly, but unwieldy and inaccurate. So here's how I would change it. Either I would drastically nerf a range of it. Think of it more as a shotgun or blunderbuss, a short distance ranged weapon. That way it wouldn't straight up replace things such as crossbows, but instead it would fill its own niche. My other idea is to drastically reduce the short range, but keep its long range. So yes, you could hit something at several hundred feet away, but it would definitely be at disadvantage. That would make it feel more like an arquebus or musket. But let's not get bogged down here though. Instead, let's move on. You also receive a magical bag at level 1 that allows you to carry all your gun paraphernalia, and it can magically create shots for your thunder cannon. It creates 40 shots on a long rest, or 10 shots on a short rest, so you're pretty much never going to run out of ammo. The bag is a bit badly explained in my opinion. It doesn't say how much it can store, for instance, or how much it weighs. The way it's worded, you could just keep making ammo each day and stocking up, but I'm not sure that is how it's intended to work. I think they need to take a close look at this part and just rewrite it to clarify it better. At 3rd level, gunsmiths gain the ability to add thunder damage to their attacks. The damage starts at 1d6 and scales up to 9d6 at level 19. This is an insane amount of damage that can be applied to every single attack. This is just 1d6 less than a rogue deals with a sneak attack. But remember that your thunder cannon is a more powerful weapon than any weapon a rogue has access to, and a rogue needs to set up sneak attacks with allies next to their targets or by being stealthed. This feels a bit overtuned, because a gunsmith artificer has plenty of other tricks up his sleeve. I'm not sure comparing a gunsmith to a rogue is the best comparison either, given their spellcasting abilities. We could for instance compare the thunder cannon to a warlock's eldritch blast instead, and there wouldn't really be any competition there. So let's get to some of those other things that the gunsmith can do when they aren't using their thundermonger ability. At level 9 they gain the ability to shoot a cone of force that knocks enemies away and damages them. This feels more in line with what I want out of the gunsmith, short range and destructive. This also scales from 2d6 to 4d6 at level 17, so a fair bit of damage, but not an insane amount for those levels. There's potentially a problem here though, and it's the same with the previous ability, and frankly the same problem that lies with all of the gunsmith abilities. You can spam this as much as you want. There's no limit to the amount of times you can use this ability. At level 14 you gain access to a piercing round that is essentially a slightly weaker lightning bolt that only travels 30 feet. It does 4d6 damage in a line, and at level 19 increases to 6d6. Not too powerful, again short range, so in line with my personal preferences, but of course also something you can use every round. At level 17 you gain the ability to fire an explosive round that does 4d8 fire damage in a 30-foot radius. Not too much for those levels, but can be used every round. Now I would like to point out that if a target succeeds with the saving throw on any of these abilities, they take no damage, just like with a cantrip, but I still find that these abilities to be just a little bit overpowered. These special shots are essentially overpowered cantrips, and they allow the gunsmith artificer to do an insane amount of damage consistently in ways that can be adjusted by situation without spending any resources, sometimes at extreme ranges. I think there should be some sort of restriction on the use of these abilities, or they need to be tuned down a bit. That was all of the abilities of a gunsmith, so let's move on to my final thoughts and overall impressions of the Artificer. I would like the Artificer to become an official class in D&D. I definitely think there are worlds where they fit in, such as Eberron. I do not want them to become a base class available at all times, however. Ideally, they would be introduced in something like a Eberron campaign guide, with suggestions on how to incorporate them into other campaign settings. At the DM's discretion, of course. I think there are some flaws having a class that is based so heavily on magical items instead of inherent abilities or spells. I think there would be a point behind looking back at some of the abilities offered to Artificers in previous editions, and perhaps some unique spells should be written for them, making them less reliable on items that can be lost or destroyed. I think a lot of the abilities possessed by the Artificer are very thematic and appropriate, but when it comes to these specializations, I think they've erred on the side of practicality and ease of play over actually living up to the fantasy of those specializations. The abilities of both specializations need to be explained more clearly, and they need a big overhaul before I would be completely happy with them. Despite all my complaints and issues, I would still allow a player to roll up an Artificer if it fit the campaign world I was DMing in. I would definitely tweak a few things, and I think that the Artificer has a long way to go until it's done, but I do think it's fully playable. I would love to hear your thoughts on the Artificer, especially how well the class lives up to your idea of an Artificer, and if it captures your imagination. I would also really like to hear what your thoughts are on D&D and technology. Are you okay with duels with 6-shooters and long guns on the streets of Waterdeep, or should the game stay firmly with its medieval fantasy roots? As always, if you enjoyed my video, please give it a like. It really helps out a lot and it always puts a smile on my face. And if you would like to see more, you can subscribe, and don't forget to press the notification bell icon. If you would like to support the channel, then please share this video with your friends or social media groups, and you can also check out my DM's Guild products or follow me on Twitter or Tumblr. Links to all of that in the description below. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers.